As I pushed open the front door with grocery bags digging into my palms, I heard my son-in-law's lazy demand for a beer echo from the living room, a sound that suddenly felt like the final crack in a dam I'd been holding back for years. The memory of those long nights at the bank, poring over loan applications until my eyes burned, surfaced unbidden, a quiet reminder of the sacrifices that had built this life, and a whisper of the storm that might finally break free. Clark Miller had always been the steady one, the man who fixed what was broken without fanfare, who believed that love meant providing, no matter the cost. For years, he'd poured his energy into supporting his daughter Tiffany and her husband Harry, convincing himself it was what a good father did. But on this soft spring Saturday in Kalispell, Montana, the weight of those grocery bags felt heavier than usual, laden not just with milk and bread, but with the unspoken burdens of a lifetime. The small suburban home on Pine Street stood as a testament to his efforts, a modest two-story, with a wraparound porch, where he'd once sat with his late wife Martha, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. The hardwood floors inside, refinished by his own hands 20 years ago, creaked under his steps as he entered. Sunlight streamed through the living room curtains, casting a warm glow that belied the chill settling in his chest. Kalispell was a place where neighbors still waved from their driveways, where the mountain air carried the promise of simplicity. But inside these walls, simplicity had long given way to something more strained. Harry lounged in the leather recliner, the one Martha had gifted Clark before cancer claimed her, his stocking feet propped up as if the chair and the house were his by right. At 30, Harry was broad-shouldered and confident, the kind of man who turned heads at the auto dealership where he worked, but his eyes stayed glued to the basketball game on the television. A half-empty beer bottle dangled from his fingers, and the remote rested on his belly like a crown. "Grab me another Corona from the fridge while you're up," Harry said, without glancing Clark's way, his voice casual, as if issuing orders to a servant. Clark set the bags down slowly on the kitchen counter, the plastic handles leaving red indents on his skin. He was 62 now, retired from the bank after 30 years, living on Social Security that barely covered his own needs, let alone the extras he funneled to this household. The Coronas had been a splurge, bought specifically for Harry with money that could have gone toward new tires for Clark's old Buick. "Excuse me?" Clark replied, keeping his tone even, though a flicker of irritation stirred within him. "You heard me," Harry muttered, still not looking up. "Not that cheap stuff you drink. Something cold." The words hung in the air, sharp and dismissive. Clark paused, wiping his hands on his worn jeans, the fabric frayed at the cuffs from years of yard work. He thought of the countless times he'd bitten his tongue when Harry had complained about the utilities bill Clark paid, or when Tiffany had charged new clothes to the credit card Clark cleared each month. It was all part of being family, he'd told himself, but lately that mantra felt hollow. "Harry, I just walked in," Clark said, unpacking the milk and placing it in the fridge. "I need to put these away first." Now Harry turned, his face twisting into that familiar expression of exaggerated patience, as if Clark were a child making unreasonable demands. He stood slowly, using his height to loom, the beer still in hand. "What's the big deal? You're already standing. I'm comfortable here." The big deal, Clark wanted to say, was that this was his house, bought with savings from a career spent helping others secure their dreams while he deferred his own. But he held back, as always, glancing toward the kitchen door where Tiffany might appear. She was 28, his only child, the light that had kept him going after Martha's death. Blonde hair often tied in a ponytail, she worked part-time at a local boutique, but her real energy went into maintaining the perfect life Harry promised. Tiffany pushed through the door then, a dish towel in her hands, her eyes taking in the scene with a warning glint Clark recognized from her teenage years. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with that tone that said she already knew and disapproved of him. "Your father's being difficult," Harry replied, eyes locked on Clark. "I asked for a beer, and he's turning it into some federal case." Tiffany sighed, looking at Clark with disappointment, as if he were the one disrupting the peace. "Dad, just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." But Harry wasn't finished. He stepped closer, the scent of alcohol on his breath mixing with the room's stale air. "See, Clark, here's how it's going to work. You live in our house, you contribute. That means when I ask you to do something, you do it. No questions, no attitude." Our house. The phrase landed like a punch. Clark's heart hammered, but he kept his voice level. "This is my house, Harry. My name on the deed." Harry's laugh was short and mocking. "Funny, because Tiffany and I live here. We pay the bills with my money. Details." The tension thickened, the basketball game's cheers from the television sounding distant and mocking. Clark searched Tiffany's face for any sign of the girl who'd once climbed into his lap during thunderstorms, her small hands clutching his shirt. But she stood beside Harry now, arms crossed, presenting a united front. "Dad, you need to decide right now," she said. "Either you help Harry and do what he asks, or you can pack your things and leave." The words echoed in Clark's mind, a betrayal so stark it stole his breath. All those years working overtime for 4 straight years to cover her $40,000 annual tuition at that private college she'd insisted on, his hands cramping from forms and figures. The wedding? $25,000 he'd covered alone when Harry's family backed out, ensuring her day was perfect with flowers and a reception hall overlooking the mountains. And the house itself, $80,000 from his retirement for the down payment because young couples needed a start. Monthly payments followed. $1,200 for the mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when times were tight. His Social Security vanished into their lives, and he'd called it love. "All right," Clark said quietly, watching Harry's smirk form, thinking he'd won. "Good," Harry said. "Now, about that beer." But Clark turned toward the hallway, leaving the bags where they sat. Behind him, Harry's breath caught sharply, and Tiffany whispered, "Dad, wait." He didn't. His footsteps were steady on the floors he'd refinished with Martha, each step a quiet declaration. In his bedroom, the suitcase came down from the closet shelf with a soft thump, a relic from their honeymoon to Yellowstone, where dreams had seemed endless. Now it lay open on the bed, ready to hold what remained of his life here. He packed methodically. Underwear, socks, 3 changes of clothes, not everything, just enough to start. From the living room came murmurs, Harry's voice rising in confusion, Tiffany's softer tones trying to calm him. They were scrambling, unprepared for rebellion from the man they'd taken for granted. Clark's hands moved on autopilot, folding shirts with care, rolling ties he'd worn to bank meetings. The photo of Martha went into a side pocket, wrapped in tissue to protect her smile. His medications for blood pressure, a reminder of stress accumulated over years, reading glasses for the fine print of statements, the small leather journal where he tracked every expense, every dollar given freely. When he wheeled the suitcase down the hallway, the whispers stopped. Harry had returned to the recliner, but his posture was alert now, watchful. Tiffany stood by the kitchen doorway, arms still crossed, her stern facade cracking with uncertainty. Neither said goodbye as Clark stepped out. The Buick started on the first try, reliable as ever. He backed out of the driveway without glancing at the house, the porch where Martha had planted flowers now overgrown. The 30-minute drive to Pine Lodge Motel wound through downtown Kalispell, past the bank where he'd spent his career, the diner where he'd shared pie with friends. Memories washed over him. Tiffany's graduation, her cap tossed high. the wedding toast where he'd spoken of pride and future joys, all funded by him, all leading to this. Pine Lodge sat on the outskirts, its faded paint and flickering neon sign a far cry from home's comfort. The room was small but clean, a bed with a sagging mattress, a chair by the window, a tiny table. Clark set his suitcase on the rack and sat on the edge of the bed, the silence hollow, temporary. He pulled out his phone, scrolling contacts. Banks, insurance, numbers memorized from decades in finance. Tomorrow was Sunday, but some changes could begin now. He opened his laptop on the table, logging into online banking. Account balances appeared. Checking, savings, retirement numbers representing denied luxuries, like the vacation he'd never taken. The cursor blinked, waiting. Outside, an elderly couple loaded suitcases into a pickup truck, the wife directing with gentle efficiency, their partnership evident in every move. Clark envied that ease, remembering how he and Martha had been the same until she was gone, and family became his anchor. But anchors could drown you if you let them. His phone remained silent, no calls yet. They didn't know the storm brewing. Clark leaned back, the cheap chair creaking, and began planning. The first call would be to the bank, but there would be more. Much more. As I turned toward the hallway with steady footsteps, leaving the groceries behind, I knew this was the moment everything would change, but they had no idea how far I was prepared to go. The suitcase thumped softly onto the bed, a relic from my honeymoon with Martha, now poised to carry me away from the home we'd built together because my own daughter had chosen her husband's ego over my dignity. As I folded the first shirt into the case, the image of cashing out that chunk of retirement savings flickered in my mind, a quiet act of faith in their future that now hinted at the unraveling I could no longer ignore. Clark Miller moved with deliberate calm, his hand steady despite the storm raging inside. The bedroom, with its faded wallpaper and the quilt Martha had sewn from scraps of old dresses, felt like a sanctuary slipping away. He'd always been the fixer, the one who mended fences literally and figuratively in this Kalispell home. But today, mending meant walking away. The goal was clear: to sever the ties that had bound him in silent servitude, to step into a space where his worth wasn't measured by what he could give. The betrayal stung fresh, a wound that pulsed with every item he packed, building a tension that mixed heartbreak with the first sparks of liberation. The room was quiet, save for the distant murmur from the living room, where Tiffany and Harry conferred in hushed tones. Kalispell's spring air filtered through the open window, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs from the yard Martha had tended so lovingly. It was mid-afternoon now, the light slanting across the bed in golden bars, a stark contrast to the emotional chill settling over the house. This suburban haven, nestled among similar homes with neatly trimmed lawns and American flags fluttering on porches, had once symbolized stability, a place where neighbors shared tools and stories over backyard barbecues. But inside, it had become a stage for ingratitude, the crisp mountain breeze doing little to ease the isolation Clark felt even before leaving. Clark himself was a picture of quiet determination, his 62-year-old frame lean from years of modest living, his graying hair neatly combed despite the chaos. Heartbreak etched lines around his eyes. But there was a resolve there, too, a shift from the enduring provider to a man reclaiming his path. Tiffany and Harry appeared only in echoes, her soft pleas mingling with his sharper protests from down the hall, their surprise evident in the urgency of their voices, underscoring how deeply they'd underestimated him. No one else intruded on this moment. It was Clark's alone, a solitary pivot point emphasizing the fracture in what should have been unbreakable family bonds. He began with the essentials, drawing underwear from the dresser drawer where Martha's old jewelry box still sat untouched. Each fold was precise, a habit from his banking days when accuracy meant everything. As he added socks, the whispers from the living room grew clearer, Harry's voice rising in disbelief. "He can't just leave like this." And Tiffany's reply, softer but insistent. "We need to talk to him, make him see reason." Clark paused, ear tilted toward the door, but didn't respond. Instead, he reached for a few shirts from the closet, the fabrics worn but serviceable, reminders of simpler times when he'd dressed for client meetings, balancing ledgers while dreaming of retirement travels that never came. Next came the photo of Martha, taken on their anniversary hike in Glacier National Park, her smile radiant against the backdrop of towering peaks. He wrapped it carefully in tissue paper from the nightstand, tucking it into the suitcase's side pocket. The act brought a lump to his throat. Martha would have hated this division, but she'd also have understood the need for self-respect. His medications followed. Pills for cholesterol and arthritis, necessities that came with age and the stress of supporting others, reading glasses folded neatly, and the small leather journal where he'd logged every outflow, $1,200 for the mortgage each month, $300 for utilities, the list a chronicle of love turned liability. Overhearing another snippet. "What if he really goes? We can't afford this place without him." Clark zipped a side compartment, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He wheeled the suitcase to the door, pausing to glance at the mirror above the dresser. The man staring back looked tired but unbowed, ready for whatever lay beyond these walls. The hallway stretched like a gauntlet, the hardwood cool under his shoes. Tiffany and Harry fell silent as he emerged, Harry's watchful eyes from the recliner meeting Clark's with a mix of defiance and wariness. Tiffany hovered near the kitchen, her ponytail disheveled, uncertainty cracking her composed facade. Clark didn't stop, didn't explain. He opened the front door, the spring breeze rushing in like an invitation, and stepped out. The old Buick waited in the driveway, its faded blue paint gleaming under the sun. Clark loaded the suitcase into the trunk with a soft thud, then slid into the driver's seat. The engine turned over smoothly, a reliable companion in an unreliable world. As he backed out, he avoided the rearview mirror, focusing instead on the road ahead. The 30-minute drive through downtown Kalispell unfolded like a reel of memories, past the bank where he'd climbed from teller to manager, reviewing countless loan applications that mirrored his own quiet generosities. 4 years of overtime for Tiffany's tuition at that fancy private school, $40,000 annually, his evenings blurred by spreadsheets and client calls, hands aching from the keyboard. The route wound by the park where he'd pushed Tiffany on swings as a child, her laughter echoing in his mind even now. Then the reception hall from her wedding, where he'd footed the $25,000 bill alone, toasts raised to futures he now questioned. Traffic was light, locals waving from sidewalks, unaware of the personal earthquake shaking him. Monthly outflows replayed in his head. $500 for groceries when Harry's commissions dipped, $280 for car insurance on vehicles he never drove. It had all seemed right at the time, a father's duty, but the ultimatum had stripped away the illusion. Pine Lodge Motel appeared on the horizon, its low-slung building hugging the town's edge, paint peeling in the mountain wind. Clark pulled into the parking lot, gravel crunching under tires, and checked in at the front desk. The clerk, a young woman with a sympathetic smile, handed him a key without questions. Room 12. Small but tidy, with a bed covered in a floral spread, a single chair by the window overlooking the lot, and a table scarred from years of transient guests. The silence here was different, hollow, echoing his solitude amid Montana's vast landscape, where the Rockies loomed like silent witnesses. He set the suitcase on the luggage rack, unzipping it to unpack a few items. Hanging shirts in the narrow closet, he caught sight of an elderly couple across the lot, the husband loading bags into a truck, while his wife guided with gentle gestures, their easy rhythm a poignant reminder of what he'd lost with Martha. Their partnership, honed over decades, stirred a deep longing in Clark, widowed too soon. He'd poured that void into family, only to find it unreciprocated. Sinking onto the stiff mattress, Clark exhaled slowly, the springs creaking under his weight. The room smelled faintly of pine cleaner, a sterile contrast to home's familiar scents. He pulled out his laptop, placing it on the table, and powered it up. Scrolling through contacts First National Bank, Geico for insurance, credit card services like Visa and the Costco account, he contemplated the web of support he'd woven. Tiffany was an authorized user on those cards, racking up balances he'd cleared without complaint. Car insurance for Harry's Silverado and her Honda, premiums eating into his fixed income. The screen glowed with possibility, account logins a gateway to change. Clark's fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart steadying as resolve hardened. This wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation, a step toward independence after years of enabling. The financial strings, so long his burden, could be cut with a few keystrokes. Outside, the couple drove off, their truck fading into the distance, leaving Clark to his thoughts. Logging into online banking, the balances appeared. Modest sums, fruits of frugality amid sacrifices. Checking account for daily needs, savings dwindled by the house down payment, $80,000 gone in a blink. Retirement funds, once robust, now shadows of what they could have been. Each number told a story of denied pleasures. No cruises, no upgrades to the Buick, just quiet provision for others. The cursor blinked in the search bar, inviting action. Clark leaned forward, the chair's vinyl cool against his back, and navigated to the autopay sections. Mortgage first, then insurance, credit authorizations. It was all within his rights, legal and straightforward, drawing on 30 years of financial knowledge. No drama, just decisions. Sipping lobby coffee from a styrofoam cup, bitter and thin, a far cry from the fresh brews Martha used to make, Clark felt the humility of starting anew. The taste grounded him, a reminder of fixed income realities many in his generation faced. Careful budgeting, no extravagances, especially after supporting adult children. Yet in this humble cup lay freedom, untainted by obligation. As twilight crept over the motel, casting long shadows across the room, Clark closed his eyes briefly, envisioning the calls ahead. Tomorrow would bring confirmations, but tonight was for reflection, the lost bonds with Tiffany, the daughter who'd once brought him handmade cards, now a stranger aligned against him. Heartbreak lingered, but so did determination, a quiet fire kindling. With the cursor blinking in the search bar, I placed the first call to the bank, knowing this was just the beginning of their regret. The bank's automated system confirmed the mortgage payment cancellation with a polite beep, severing one invisible chain that had bound me to their entitled lives for far too long. While navigating the insurance portal to remove those vehicles from my policy, the recollection of Harry's grumbling about tight budgets stirred something deeper, a subtle warning of hidden vices that might explain his constant need for more. Clark Miller sat at the small table in his Pine Lodge motel room, the surface cluttered with bank statements and legal pads, his laptop screen casting a blue glow in the dim light. This was the advance he needed, methodically dismantling the financial lifelines that had sustained Tiffany and Harry's carefree existence while piecing together the first clues of deeper deceit. Each action built suspense, like laying bricks in a wall that would soon enclose them in their own consequences, his resolve sharpening with every confirmation. The morning was gray and overcast, fitting the mood as rain pattered against the motel window, the fluorescent bulb overhead buzzing faintly. Pine Lodge felt even more confined today, the air heavy with the scent of damp carpet and stale coffee from the lobby urn. Kalispell on a Sunday like this evoked quiet reflection, churches filling with families, diners serving hearty breakfasts to locals bundled against the chill. But for Clark, it was a battlefield of paperwork, the cramped space a command center where he orchestrated his quiet rebellion, the town's small-scale rhythm, with its emphasis on community ties and personal accountability, amplified his sense of purpose amid the chaos he'd left behind. Clark's focus was unwavering, his emotional state a blend of steely determination and a detached curiosity about how far the rot had spread. At 62, he moved with the precision of his banking background, jotting notes in neat handwriting. Bob Harrison would enter later as an unexpected ally, his straightforward demeanor providing a stark contrast to the antagonist's duplicity. Tiffany and Harry manifested through mounting voicemails, their voices shifting from bewilderment to fury, serving as harbingers of the panic Clark's moves were igniting. He started with the calls, phone pressed to his ear as he paced the narrow strip between bed and wall. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," the bank representative said after he waded through the automated menu. "How can I assist you today?" "I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street, account ending in 4729, Clark replied, his voice calm, rehearsed. A pause, keys clicking. "I show this has been active for 5 years. Are you sure?" "Completely sure. The homeowners no longer qualify for my assistance." More clicking, then confirmation. Clark noted the reference number on his pad, a growing list like coordinates on a map. Next, the insurance company, Geico, where he'd bundled their cars onto his policy 3 years ago. "I'd like to remove 2 vehicles," he told the agent. "My daughter and son-in-law will need their own coverage." "Effective today?" the agent asked. "Yes." Another confirmation scribbled down, the weight lifting incrementally from his shoulders. Credit cards followed, a longer process. Tiffany as authorized user on Visa, MasterCard, and the Costco card balances he'd paid down month after month. Purchases for clothes, dinners, things he'd never seen. Removing them means they'll need to apply independently, the representative explained. Outstanding balances remain yours, but no new charges. Understood. Proceed immediately. Clark hung up, exhaling slowly, the room's harsh light highlighting the lines on his face. 8 calls by noon. Life insurance adjustments started, automatic transfers halted. All legal, all drawing on his expertise, the ins and outs of systems he'd mastered over decades. His phone had begun vibrating midway through, missed calls accumulating like storm clouds. He ignored them at first, focusing on the task, but curiosity won out. Listening in order, the progression was telling. Tiffany's initial confusion about a banking error with the mortgage, her tone casual, assuming a fix was forthcoming. Harry's curt message about insurance lapsing, annoyance evident. By midweek projections in his mind, panic would set in, but already the shift was audible in later voicemails, frustration cracking Tiffany's voice, Harry's aggression building. Needing a break, Clark gathered his notes and headed to the diner on Main Street, a 3-block walk through the drizzle. The place was a staple in Kalispell, its red vinyl booths and chrome counter evoking 50s nostalgia, the air thick with bacon grease and fresh coffee. Retirees lingered over newspapers. Off-duty workers chatted about weekend hunts in the mountains. Clark slid into his usual corner booth, the waitress pouring coffee without asking black, strong, the way he'd taken it since Martha's days. He'd barely stirred in sugar when a voice called out. "Clark Miller, well, I'll be." Bob Harrison approached from a window table, newspaper tucked under his arm, his face lined with the same years of service at First National. They'd shared coffee breaks for 15 years before Bob's transfer, handling loans and life stories in equal measure. Now in his late 50s, Bob's handshake was firm, his eyes sharp. "Mind if I join? Haven't seen you since Martha's service." Clark nodded, using the interruption to gauge how much to share. Bob was reliable, bound by professional ethics, but also a friend. "Family situation," Clark said finally. "Needed space." Bob studied him, then lowered his voice. "That son-in-law of yours tried something shady a few months back." Clark's coffee cup paused mid-lift. "What kind?" "Home equity loan on your house, $50,000. Claimed ownership. Brought paperwork that looked real at first." The diner's hum seemed to fade, conversations blurring into background noise as Clark processed. "My house?" Bob nodded, leaning in. "Title search showed it all in your name. No co-signers. The docs were forged, Clark. Deliberate fraud. I handled it personally, rejected it, flagged his info." "When?" Clark asked, voice steady but mind racing. "December, January, maybe." Bob glanced around, ensuring privacy. "No money changed hands, so legally gray, but I kept copies." Clark set his cup down carefully, the ceramic clinking softly. This wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated, Harry scheming behind smiles and complaints. Connecting it to the beer demand, the ultimatum, it reframed everything as part of a larger plan. "You didn't know?" Bob asked. Clark shook his head. "He always talked money troubles, but this—" Bob's expression darkened further. "Word is it's gambling debts, substantial. Jim Morrison mentioned Harry's a regular at Glacier Peaks Casino. Higher stakes lately." The name Jim Morrison rang bells. Detective, church committee acquaintance, father to one of Tiffany's old classmates. If he knew, it was solid. Clark's anger deepened, a righteous burn replacing mild resentment. Harry's disrespect wasn't random. It was cover for exploitation, the house a target for his vices. "Be careful," Bob warned. "Cornered men like that get desperate." Clark thanked him, paying for coffee he'd scarcely touched, mind already updating mental files. Back at the motel, rain heavier now, he opened his laptop and created a document. Harry Thompson evidence. Typing in Bob's revelations, the forged loan attempt. Gambling hints, he connected dots. Harry's overtime excuses, the constant cash needs. This was calculated, years in the making. His phone buzzed again. 22 missed calls by week's end in his estimation. But he deleted messages methodically, feeling only detached interest in their desperation. The evidence file grew, a digital arsenal drawing on his career's pattern recognition, spotting fraud in applications, now applied personally. The organization of statements spread like a general's campaign map, appealed to his professional soul. 30 years of expertise turning the tables. Social Security eroded bit by bit into their support, a erosion many retirees knew too well, funding adult children's lives while skimping on their own. But no more. Bob's words echoed. Gambling debts, $18,000 to $20,000. It transformed Clark's view. Harry wasn't just lazy. He was a thief in waiting. The ultimatum a ploy to keep access. Righteous anger ignited, fueling his next steps. Back in the motel, with my phone buzzing from an unknown creditor's number, I realized it was time to contact Detective Morrison. The pieces were falling into place faster than I anticipated. The courthouse clerk's stamp echoed like a gavel in my mind, finalizing the eviction notice that would strip Harry and Tiffany of the home they'd claimed as their own. A home I'd paid for with decades of my life. Holding those papers tightly, the crisp edges biting into my fingers, I recalled the quiet transfer of $25,000 for Tiffany's wedding gown, and the grand hall with its chandeliers sparkling over the dance floor. A father's gift, now tainted by the shadow of impending collectors who would soon demand what was owed. Clark Miller strode out of the Flathead County Courthouse with a sense of momentum building, each step on the brick steps propelling him further into the fray. This phase was about escalation, leveraging legal tools to expose and dismantle the web of lies Harry had spun, while the small town's whispers began to amplify the truth, heightening Harry's desperation and forcing the cracks in their facade to widen. The courthouse loomed behind him, its cold brick facade a symbol of impartial justice in Kalispell, Montana, where such buildings had stood for generations, handling disputes over land and legacies with unyielding efficiency. Inside the clerk's office earlier, the air had been thick with the scent of old files and fresh ink, fluorescent lights humming overhead as the middle-aged woman behind the counter reviewed his documents. "Mr. Miller, you understand this is your daughter's residence?" she'd asked, peering over her glasses at the deed. Clark had nodded, citing the breached verbal terms mutual respect and household contributions, both long violated. The stamp had come down with authority, initiating a 30-day notice. The sheriff's service promised within 48 hours. It was all so straightforward, rooted in Montana law, the kind of process that resonated with folks who'd navigated property squabbles over inherited farms or family cabins. Transitioning now to the police station a few blocks away, Clark walked through Kalispell's quiet streets, passing the hardware store where he'd picked up nails for home repairs, and the coffee shop where locals swapped stories about fishing in Flathead Lake. The town buzzed subtly with weekend activity retirees, strolling with dogs, families heading to parks, but beneath it lay the tight-knit dynamics of a community where news traveled faster than the wind off the Rockies. Gossip here wasn't malicious. It was a network of accountability, the sort older residents relied on to sort right from wrong in personal matters. At the station, Detective Jim Morrison's office was a cramped nook at the back, dominated by filing cabinets stacked with reports and a desk marred by coffee rings from countless mugs. Jim, with his graying temples and firm grip, welcomed Clark with a nod, their shared history from church committees lending an easy trust. Jim was in his 50s, a solid figure in the community, his role blending law enforcement with the moral compass of a longtime local. "Clark, what brings you by?" he asked, gesturing to a chair. "Information on Harry Thompson," Clark replied, settling in, his determination evident in the steady gaze. Harry and Tiffany hovered in the background through reports and Clark's phone, their panic manifesting in frantic messages he'd glimpsed texts about bills piling up, voices edged with accusation. Clark laid out the basics. The ultimatum, his departure, Bob's revelation of the forged loan attempt. Jim listened, jotting notes on a yellow pad, his expression shifting to keen interest. "Harry's known at Glacier Peaks," Jim said, leaning back. "Poker tables mostly, higher stakes recently. Creditors are circling mix of banks and rougher types. I'd estimate $18,000 to $20,000 owed, spread out." The figure landed heavily, confirming Bob's hints but adding layers. Legitimate lenders impatient after 6 weeks of stalling, others less inclined to involve police in collections. "Timeline?" Clark pressed. 3 months before escalation for most. Harry's running short." Jim paused, eyeing Clark. This fits with what Bob mentioned: fraud to cover debts. As they talked, Clark's phone rang Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who'd lived next door for 20 years, her voice concerned over the line. "Clark, there's been shouting over there, mostly Harry. Police drove by twice yesterday. You all right where you are?" "Thank you for watching," Clark said, appreciating the vigilance that defined small-town life, where neighbors checked fences and well-being alike. Mrs. Patterson's call painted a vivid picture, raised voices echoing through thin walls, Tiffany's pleas cutting through Harry's rants, the strain visible even from afar. Back in Jim's office, Clark shifted gears. "What about protection? Harry's getting aggressive." Jim nodded, pulling a form. "With the patterned threats, fraud, we can pursue a restraining order. 500 feet minimum." The conversation turned strategic, Jim offering to fast-track it based on evidence. But Clark had more moves, contacting creditors directly. Later, walking back through the streets, he dialed Frontier Financial Services, one who'd left messages assuming his address was Harry's. "This is Clark Miller. Regarding Harry Thompson's account, he has no claim to my property. He's no longer residing there. He works at Mountain View Auto on Highway 93. The call was factual, brief, no paying debts, just correcting deceptions, redirecting pressure where it belonged. He made others. Continental credit recovery, each one chipping away at Harry's shields. By afternoon, 6 agencies informed, Clark felt the tide turning, the legal eviction a hammer ready to fall. Word was spreading too. Tom from the hardware store texted about Harry stopping by, spinning tales of Clark's mental breakdown and abandonment. "He's telling folks you promised lifelong support, then bailed out of spite," Tom wrote. It was Harry's counteroffensive, desperate smears to salvage reputation. But Kalispell's grapevine favored truth, especially among those who'd seen Clark's steady character over years. The walk evoked nostalgia. Past the post office where he'd mailed college applications for Tiffany, the church steeple rising against the sky, a place of solace and now potential reckoning. Clark pondered his future plans, donating the house to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative, turning it into apartments for families who'd served, a contrast to Harry's self-serving greed that honored real sacrifice. Jim's final disclosure came as they wrapped up. One more thing: Harry consulted a lawyer about adverse possession, squatters' rights, researched claiming your house after continuous occupation. The words hit like ice water. Montana's law required 5 years of hostile possession without permission, no basis here, since Clark had allowed them to stay rent-free. But the intent stunned. A 3-year plan to steal the home through legal loopholes, premeditated theft masked as family living. Clark's indignation surged, resolve hardening to steel. This wasn't random entitlement. It was a calculated heist, Harry plotting while accepting handouts. The depth fueled Clark's fire, transforming pain into unyielding purpose. As I forwarded a threatening text from an unknown number to Jim, I knew Harry's next move would be reckless, and I was ready to counter it with everything I had. Harry's voice boomed outside the bank, calling me a senile old man who abandoned his pregnant daughter. But the crowd's murmurs told me the town was starting to see through his lies. The thought of those $280 monthly premiums I'd shouldered for Harry's Silverado, a vehicle that ferried him to late-night card games, lingered like a shadow, pointing toward the moment when his hidden losses would spill into the open and strip away his mask. Clark Miller approached the scene with measured steps, his composure a shield against the rising storm. This juncture demanded confrontation, Harry's frantic attempts to twist the narrative clashing against Clark's unyielding facts, while Tiffany's desperate ploy tested the limits of his forgiveness, pushing the conflict to its emotional brink and forcing decisions that could shatter illusions for good. The downtown square outside First National Bank buzzed with Saturday morning activity, locals milling about under a crisp blue sky, the air carrying the faint scent of fresh pastries from the nearby bakery. Kalispell's heart beat here, with its brick-paved sidewalks and storefronts displaying fishing gear and handmade quilts, a place where community gatherings often turned into impromptu forums for town talk, especially on weekends when folks ran errands before heading to lake outings or church picnics. The bank building itself stood solid, its glass doors reflecting the gathering group customers pausing mid-stride, drawn by Harry's loud proclamations. Clark's resolve held firm, a quiet strength honed from years of handling delicate negotiations behind teller counters. Harry loomed large in the center, his face flushed with rage, desperation fueling his outbursts as he gestured wildly to anyone listening. Tiffany's influence hovered through her recent call, her voice thick with fabricated tears, adding layers of manipulation to the mix. Scattered townsfolk formed a loose circle, their expressions shifting from curiosity to skepticism, serving as a mirror to the community's evolving judgment. Steve Brennan, the Pine Lodge manager, would appear later via report, his military-honed vigilance providing tangible proof of threats. Harry spotted Clark and pivoted, his tirade amplifying. "There he is, the man who's lost his mind, kicking out his own flesh and blood over nothing. Senile old fool thinks we're stealing from him, but he's the one abandoning a pregnant daughter in her time of need." The words sliced through the air, drawing gasps from a few onlookers, but Clark noted the murmurs. "That doesn't sound like Clark," one woman whispered to her companion. "He's always been steady." Clark halted a few feet away, meeting Harry's glare evenly, the crowd's attention splitting between them like a jury in session. "Hello, Harry," Clark said, his tone level, cutting through the bluster. "How's the debt situation coming along? $18,000, from what I've heard mostly at the poker tables." Harry's face purpled, the accusation landing like a blow. Several people pulled out phones, fingers tapping screens, the modern ripple of information spreading. "You're crazy," Harry sputtered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Glacier Peaks Casino," Clark continued calmly, drawing on Jim's details. "Detective Morrison has the rundown. Amazing how much a man can lose when someone else foots the bills." The crowd's whispers grew, pieces clicking. An older man nodding. "Heard something about that at the diner." Harry's eyes darted, control slipping as his narrative frayed. He stepped closer, towering over Clark, but the older man didn't flinch, his stance rooted in dignity earned through quiet endurance. Tiffany's call from earlier replayed in Clark's mind the sobs, the claim of pregnancy complications, her plea for family unity. "I'm pregnant, Dad. The stress could make me lose the baby." It had twisted something in him, that paternal instinct. But the timing reeked of calculation, her details vague. An appointment next week with Dr. Richards, but no specifics. Clark had probed gently, offering to cover medical costs directly through the doctor, only for her to snap. "You can't just call it's private." The line had gone dead, suspicion confirmed when he later dialed the women's clinic himself, the receptionist politely noting no record of such an appointment. It was a ruse, emotional blackmail to reel him back, but it only steeled his path. Now, facing Harry, Clark pressed. "And the family medical emergency? That's a low blow even for you." Harry's composure cracked further, his voice rising. "You bastard, you're ruining us over spite! Tiffany's carrying your grandchild and you don't care?" The crowd leaned in, but skepticism showed. A man in overalls muttering, Clark wouldn't ignore something real. Clark shook his head. "I checked with Dr. Richards. No appointment, no pregnancy. Just another lie to manipulate." Gasps rippled, phones buzzing with texts, news flying through Kalispell's network, from coffee shops to church groups. Harry lunged forward a step, fists clenched, but a bystander intervened. "Easy there." The confrontation peaked in that instant, Harry's threats boiling over into a growled promise. "This isn't over, old man. You'll regret crossing me." Clark held his ground, the height difference meaningless against his inner fortitude. "I've documented every cent. $60,000 for education, $25,000 for the wedding. What have you documented, Harry? Casino receipts?" Harry shoved through the crowd, storming off toward his truck, the engine roaring as he peeled away. The group dispersed slowly, some approaching Clark with pats on the back. "Hang in there," one said. "We know your character." Clark nodded thanks, but his mind raced to the next layer, Harry's volatility escalating. He walked toward the diner for a moment's refuge, the familiar bell chiming as he entered, booths filled with the hum of conversations now laced with fresh gossip. Ordering a slice of cherry pie, Martha's favorite. Though he'd avoided it lately, the flaky crust and tart filling grounded him amid the whirl. But peace was short-lived. His phone vibrated with a message from Steve Brennan. "That guy was back at the motel, loitering outside your door, muttering threats. Got it on camera, guests complained." Clark forwarded the details to Jim. The security footage a concrete anchor. Harry's figure pacing, fists balled, words like "teach him a lesson," caught on audio. It was evidence of intent, violation brewing even as the restraining order processed. The afternoon wore on. Clark returning to Pine Lodge, the parking lot empty under the neon glow. Steve met him at the office, USB drive in hand. Retired sergeant seen types like him, willing to hand this over to police. Gratitude swelled in Clark. Allies like Steve, with his no-nonsense bearing, reinforced that justice wasn't solitary. The footage showed Harry's agitation clearly, a man unraveling as creditors closed in and lies crumbled. Tiffany texted then, "Dad, Harry's out of control. Those men came again asking about assets. What have you done?" Her words carried real fear now, the web tightening. Clark replied briefly, "Told the truth. He created this." The exchange underscored the shift, Tiffany cracking under pressure, perhaps seeing Harry's true colors. But Clark wouldn't yield to pity. Dignity demanded boundaries. In the motel room, Clark reviewed the day's toll. Public humiliation turned back on Harry, the fake crisis exposed, threats documented. The crowd's support validated his stand, whispers turning to outright defense in a town that valued fairness. Yet the pregnancy lie lingered, a cruel twist preying on his hopes for legacy. If real, he'd have helped. Fabricated, it only deepened the betrayal. As Harry stormed off, vowing this wasn't over, I dialed Jim to report the restraining order violation, knowing the sheriff would be at their door by morning. Tiffany stood at the church podium, her voice trembling but clear, admitting to the congregation how she'd betrayed the father who'd given her everything, while I sat in the pew, wondering if trust could ever be rebuilt. As she spoke, a vivid image rose unbidden. Young Tiffany in our backyard on an autumn afternoon, her small hands gathering fallen leaves into piles, then weaving dandelions into makeshift crowns she'd place on my head with giggles, a simple joy that now ached with the possibility of mending what had been so thoroughly broken. Clark Miller shifted slightly on the hard wooden pew, the familiar creak echoing faintly in the hushed sanctuary of St. Mark's Lutheran Church. The air was cool and still on this Sunday morning in Kalispell, carrying the faint scent of polished oak and fresh flowers arranged near the altar lilies and chrysanthemums donated by parishioners for the weekly service. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, depicting biblical scenes of forgiveness and renewal, casting colorful patterns across the packed rows. The congregation was fuller than usual, word having spread through the town's network of phone calls and coffee shop chats about an impending family revelation. Kalispell's churches like this one served as anchors for the community, places where older folks gathered not just for sermons, but for the comfort of shared values and quiet support, especially on crisp days when the Rockies loomed snow-capped in the distance. Pastor Williams stood off to the side, his gentle presence a steadying force, his white collar crisp against his dark robe. In his late 50s, with a kind face etched by years of counseling troubled souls, he nodded encouragingly at Tiffany as she gripped the podium's edges. Tiffany herself looked transformed, her usual poised demeanor fractured, eyes red-rimmed from genuine tears, her hands shaking as she unfolded a prepared statement. At 28, she appeared smaller up there, vulnerability stripping away the entitlement that had defined her recent years. Clark watched with cautious hope, his emotional state a delicate balance, relief at this step toward accountability, mingled with the wariness of a man who'd learned trust was fragile. Harry was absent, his downfall unfolding off stage, a shadow retreating into irrelevance. The service had begun with hymns that filled the vaulted ceiling, Amazing Grace, and How Great Thou Art voices rising in harmony, a collective warmth that contrasted the chill outside. Pastor Williams had led prayers for healing divided families, his words seeming tailored to the moment without naming names. Now, during testimony time, Tiffany had risen from the back row, her steps deliberate down the center aisle, the congregation falling silent as she ascended the small platform. "I need to tell you all something important about my father," she began, her voice gaining strength despite the quiver. For the past 5 years, Clark Miller has been supporting my husband and me financially in ways I never fully appreciated until it was too late." Murmurs rippled softly, heads turning toward Clark in the third row, but he kept his gaze forward, hands folded in his lap. Tiffany continued, detailing the sacrifices with unflinching honesty. "He paid $160,000 for my college education at a private school when a state university would have sufficed. He covered $25,000 for my wedding, including the dress, flowers, and reception, when my husband's family couldn't contribute. And the house our family home, where he and my mother built their life, he provided the down payment and covered the mortgage payments month after month, even as he lived on a fixed income from Social Security." The sanctuary grew pin-drop quiet, even the children sensing the weight. Tiffany's voice cracked as she admitted the betrayal. "When my father refused to be treated like a servant in his own home, Harry and I gave him an ultimatum: obey or leave. He chose to leave, preserving his dignity, while I stood by and let it happen. I chose loyalty to a man who disrespected my father over the man who raised me with endless patience and love." Tears streamed down her face, but she pressed on. "I'm standing here because Dad gave me one last chance to choose truth over pride. We were wrong, terribly wrong. He deserved gratitude, respect, and instead, we repaid him with demands and indifference." The congregation stirred, supportive whispers spreading, an older woman dabbing her eyes, a man nodding solemnly. Pastor Williams stepped forward as Tiffany finished, his voice warm with emotion. "Sometimes the greatest courage is admitting our failings before those who know us best. Tiffany has shown that today, and Clark has exemplified grace under trial. Let this remind us all of the power of forgiveness and the importance of honoring those who've sacrificed for us." Applause broke out softly, more affirmation than celebration, as Tiffany returned to her seat. After the service, people approached Clark outside under the church's awning, where frost clung to the grass and breath fogged in the air. Handshakes and hugs came, Mrs. Henderson squeezing his arm. "We always knew you were the steady one, Clark. This took real strength." Tom from the hardware store clapped his shoulder. "Boundaries with family ain't easy, but you did right." The most pivotal exchange came with Tiffany herself, lingering near the steps as the crowd thinned. "The letter to the Tribune runs Wednesday," she said quietly, wrapping her coat tighter against the wind. "Facebook post tonight, visible to everyone. Full details, like you asked." Clark nodded, studying her face, older now, marked by regret. "And Harry?" She looked down, voice barely above a whisper. "He left yesterday. Packed the truck while I was out. No note, no address. Gone to avoid the collectors, I suppose." Her eyes met his. "I filed for divorce this morning. Found out he'd been using my cards for more gambling debts worse than we knew, thousands more." The news settled like closure. Harry's flight a final admission of defeat, his character laid bare. Clark felt no triumph, only a quiet vindication men like that always ran when accountability loomed. "I'm sorry it ended this way," he said, meaning it for her sake. "I'm not," Tiffany replied, a spark of resolve in her eyes. "Counseling starts next week. I need to learn what healthy looks like." They stood in awkward silence, the church bells tolling noon, signaling the end of services across town. Clark's thoughts turned to the house. The will already altered and filed, the property destined for the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. It was a decision born of clarity, turning the home into transitional apartments for veteran families, honoring true service over entitlement. 3 months later, Clark stood in the front yard of what had been his family home, watching the transformation unfold. Workers had divided it into 3 units, each with private entrances and shared outdoor spaces, a playground set donated by local businesses, now echoing with children's laughter. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos approached, her 2 kids scampering toward the swings. In her mid-30s, with a no-nonsense posture from deployment days, she extended a hand. "Mr. Miller, this means the world to us. Stable housing after service, it's a fresh start we couldn't have dreamed of." "Veterans know sacrifice," Clark replied, shaking her hand firmly. "This place should go to those who've earned it through honor." Maria nodded, her eyes grateful. "We've got community support too, meals from the church, job leads from folks downtown. It's like the whole town pitched in." The scene warmed Clark. The laughter of kids grounding the moment in hope, a counterpoint to the drama that had unfolded here. He'd overseen the donation process, attorneys ensuring everything was ironclad, the initiative's staff praising his generosity. It aligned with values he'd held dear: service, resilience, the quiet pride of giving without strings. His own life had shifted to the lakeside cabin on Flathead Lake, a modest 2-bedroom retreat purchased with reclaimed savings. Mornings began with coffee on the deck, steam rising as the sun crested the mountains, the water lapping gently at the dock where his small fishing boat bobbed. Afternoons meant casting lines for trout, the solitude healing after years of strain. Evenings brought reading by the fireplace, books on history and nature, simple pleasures that felt luxurious now that financial drains were sealed. The cabin's interior was cozy, a kitchen stocked with basics, where Clark prepared meals from fresh market produce, savoring the independence. No more funding others' extravagances. His fixed income stretched comfortably here, allowing small indulgences like a new rod or bird feeder for the ospreys nesting nearby. Tiffany's text arrived one such evening, as Clark watched the lake's surface turn gold under the setting sun. "Dad, 3 months into counseling learning about boundaries and respect. Coffee sometime? I'd like to start earning your trust, one step at a time." He smiled faintly, the osprey diving gracefully into the shallows, emerging with a flash of silver. She'd kept her promises. The newspaper letter thorough, detailing sacrifices and regrets. The social media post generating waves of community support, comments affirming Clark's integrity. More importantly, her actions showed effort, no demands, just accountability. Typing back. "Saturday at the diner sounds good." Clark set the phone aside, the children's distant laughter from the veterans' complex echoing in his mind like a promise of renewal. Justice had been served not through vengeance, but truth, dignity preserved in the face of betrayal. And perhaps in time, a daughter could rebuild what was lost, through honest work rather than expectation. As I watched the osprey soar over Flathead Lake with a fish in its talons, Tiffany's text lit up my phone, promising a coffee meeting, and I wondered if she could truly earn back my trust. In the quiet aftermath of betrayal, Clark Miller found a peace he hadn't known in years, standing on the deck of his lakeside cabin as the sun dipped below the Rockies, painting the water in hues of orange and gold. The journey had been long and painful, a path carved from the raw edges of sacrifice turned sour, but it led him here to a place where self-respect bloomed like wildflowers after a harsh winter. He thought often of the house that once held his dreams, now a haven for veteran families who understood the weight of true giving, their laughter echoing as a balm against the silence of his former life. Tiffany's words at the church still lingered, her admission a crack in the armor of entitlement that had shielded her from reality for too long. Yet forgiveness wasn't immediate. It was a seed planted in soil, enriched by time and genuine effort, waiting to see if it would take root. Clark sipped his coffee, the steam rising like memories of Martha's gentle touch, reminding him that love, when one-sided, becomes a chain rather than a bond. The central lesson learned was clear. Family isn't defined by blood alone, but by mutual respect and shared burdens, where self-worth must never be negotiated away for the sake of harmony. Arrogance, like Harry's, invites its own downfall, a house of cards collapsing under the wind of truth. Setting boundaries isn't selfishness, it's the foundation of dignity, a shield against those who would exploit kindness as weakness. In reclaiming his finances and his home, Clark reclaimed his voice, proving that empowerment comes not from revenge, but from the quiet strength to say no. The older generation knows this well, having built lives on hard work and frugality, only to face ingratitude from those they raised. But in Clark's story, there's validation, a reminder that it's never too late to stand tall. Emotions swirled as he watched the osprey glide, a symbol of patience rewarded, stirring a cathartic release from years of suppressed hurt. Tiffany's tentative steps toward reconciliation brought hope, yet caution. Trust, once shattered, rebuilds slowly, brick by honest brick. The true meaning of family emerged not in obligations, but in choices, choosing respect over convenience, accountability over excuses. Harry's flight into the unknown was a fitting end, consequences catching up like shadows at dusk, a warning to the arrogant that deception unravels eventually. Clark's journey from victim to victor inspired a sense of triumph, empowering those who feel undervalued to recognize their own worth. Philosophy remains. In the face of betrayal, dignity is the greatest inheritance one can claim. As the lake lapped gently, Clark reflected on the small victories, the restraining order that drew a line, the public truths that cleared the air. Each action had been a step toward liberation, a cathartic shedding of burdens that no longer served him. For an audience who cherishes fairness, this tale resonates deeply, affirming that strength lies in quiet resolve. Self-respect, once reclaimed, becomes an unshakable fortress against life's storms. The consequences of arrogance played out vividly, Harry's world crumbling as creditors closed in, his bravado exposed as hollow. Family, in its purest form, thrives on reciprocity, not exploitation. A lesson Tiffany was learning through counseling and solitude. Clark's empowerment was complete in the cabin's simplicity, where mornings brought fresh purpose without the drain of demands. Emotions of relief washed over him, mingled with nostalgia for the father-daughter bond that might yet heal. Boundaries, he realized, protect the heart as much as they define relationships. The older American spirit, rooted in hard-earned wisdom, finds solace in such stories of resilience. Arrogance blinds, but truth illuminates, revealing paths to justice without malice. Clark's sacrifices, once taken for granted, now stood as testaments to his character, honored in the veterans' homes. Tiffany's public apology marked a turning point, her vulnerability a bridge toward possible redemption. Yet self-worth demands vigilance, a daily choice to value oneself amid others' expectations. The journey evoked a profound sense of catharsis, releasing pent-up frustrations into the mountain air. Family respect isn't owed. It's earned through actions, not words alone. In setting boundaries, Clark taught that enabling erodes the soul, while empowerment restores it. The arrogance of youth often clashes with the wisdom of age, but fairness prevails in the end. Emotions of validation surged, for those who've given endlessly only to feel invisible. True family cherishes contributions, weaving them into a tapestry of gratitude. Clark's story empowers the undervalued to rise, reclaiming narratives twisted by ingratitude. The philosophy remains a guiding light. Self-respect is the compass through betrayal's fog. Consequences for arrogance arrive unbidden, like debt collectors at dawn. Tiffany's growth, though tentative, offered glimmers of hope for mended ties. In the cabin's tranquility, Clark found joy in solitude, a reward for his steadfastness. The central lesson echoes, respect yourself first, and family will follow or fade. Emotions of triumph swell, cathartic and sweet, for justice served quietly. Boundaries aren't walls, they're gardens where healthy relationships flourish. Arrogance wilts under scrutiny, as Harry's did amid town whispers. Self-worth, once dimmed, shines brightest after the storm. Family's true meaning lies in equity, not extraction. Clark's empowerment inspires older hearts weary from giving. The journey from selfless to sovereign validates unspoken struggles. Philosophy remains. Dignity endures beyond all trials. If you like the story, then leave it number 1 in the comments below. Consequences teach where words fail, as Tiffany discovered through loss. Emotions of release flow, empowering the listener to reflect on their own boundaries. Respect in family fosters strength, not submission. Arrogance invites isolation, Harry's fate a stark example. Self-worth blooms in independence, as Clark's cabin life attests. The tale cathartically affirms fairness as life's cornerstone. Family respect rebuilds on honesty, Tiffany's path a hopeful start. Empowerment comes from within, ignited by betrayal's fire. Older Americans nod knowingly, their values mirrored in Clark's stand. The central lesson endures: cherish self-respect above all. Emotions stir deeply, a mix of sorrow and satisfaction. Boundaries safeguard the spirit against exploitation. Arrogance crumbles when truth prevails. Self-worth is the ultimate legacy. Family's essence is mutual uplift, not one-way drain. Clark's journey cathartically closes a chapter of pain. Philosophy remains. In reclaiming dignity, one finds true peace. If you enjoyed this emotional tale of sacrifice and justice, subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart. Leave a like if it resonated with you, and comment number 1 to show your support. Our channel brings narratives of empowerment and family truths straight to you. Hit that subscribe button now to never miss the next story that might just change your perspective. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Your engagement keeps these tales alive.